Oh, hello there. I've got a hunch that you want to know exactly what you need to do to get a grade 9 within your AQA GCSE Macbeth essay. You're in the right place. Watch Schofield on Shakespeare.
We're gonna build a palace and we'll be so proud. A palace where the roar of the crowd will tell the world our palace will last forever.
Here's an outline of the treats in store for you in this video. You can skip to any particular section by clicking on the YouTube description below. However, I'd recommend watching this video in sequential order. Here's the AQA mark scheme for the Shakespeare extract question. Let's hone in on the top band, level 6, to see exactly what the examiner is looking for. So, what have we got? Well, first up is that you need to have a critical, exploratory, conceptualized response to task and whole text. What does this mean? Well, to some extent, this is about using the correct register, writing formally, and not ending up simply telling us what happens in the play rather than analysing the question. Your response needs to be informed, personal, and interesting, so it's clear that you have a detailed understanding of both the extract and the text as a whole, and have developed your own ideas. You don't just have one idea at the beginning of each paragraph. Your argument actually goes somewhere. The best candidates will litter their responses with fairly short, precise, embedded quotations, which flow seamlessly within their writing. Note the adjective judicious. Your quotations will not just be the simple ones, but will be wisely chosen. At times, these quotations will be reasonably complex and require more extended analysis than easier monosyllabic ones. The mark scheme also calls for consistently effective use of relevant subject terminology. So be precise. When Shakespeare uses a simile or a metaphor or personification, state this. Don't mix up your nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Write, this simile suggests, rather than this suggests. In addition, always explore how the writer presents a key idea. Don't just state what this idea is. You need to probe language, form, and structure in splendidly precise detail, dear viewers, subscribers, and pupils. You need to show you understand what the trickier words mean before going on to explore their effects. Finally, you need to weave in and integrate the occasional reference to the context. In terms of Macbeth, this might be a reference to contemporary beliefs about witches. Indeed, King James wrote an entire book about them entitled Demonology, though of course this doesn't mean that everyone believed willy-nilly in their existence. Hence texts such as Reginald Scott's 1584, The Discovery of Witchcraft. As an article on the British Library website explains, Scott argued that belief in magic was both irrational and unchristian. He suggested non-magical reasons and causes for both magical phenomena and accusations of witchcraft. So, what you mustn't do when weaving in reference to the context is to oversimplify. So, when writing about the context, don't write. Moreover, the majority of contemporary audiences would have believed in witches. They would have been afraid of their potential to cause harm and spread evil. Instead, be nuanced. Whilst it is likely that a higher proportion of a contemporary audience would have believed in witches in comparison to modern times, there would also have been a significant number more sceptical, as confirmed within texts such as Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft. Therefore, their unsettling effect is likely to stem more from their appearance and abrupt, disconcerting predictions, rather than any status as representatives of the supernatural. As well as these 30 marks, there are an additional 4 marks available for the accuracy of your spelling, punctuation, and the control of your sentence structures. Provided you write clearly and accurately, it should be relatively easy to gobble up these 4 marks. Time now for an exam-style question. Read the following extract from Act 3, Scene 4, and then answer the question that follows. At this point in the play, Macbeth is shocked to see the ghost of Banquo at a banquet. Starting with this moment in the play, explore how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth. Write about how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth in this extract, how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth in the play as a whole. And here is the extract. Read it through to yourself, pressing pause. The video will resume in 5 seconds' time. How might you structure your response? Don't fall into the trap of simply narrating what happens in the extract. Instead, start your paragraph by answering the question. What is Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth within a moment from this extract? Next up, embed a quotation, but by God, choose it carefully. I would suggest using a more complex one immediately, one which other weaker students won't fully understand. Next, AO2 analysis. Delve into the meaning and effect of words from the quotation. For the more complex quotations, you are likely to write 2 to 3 sentences exploring and explaining exactly what the writer is aiming to suggest. Having squeezed all the juice from the quotation, you are likely to have an even more nuanced point to make about Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth. You are likely to have developed and moved on from your initial idea. In this section, you may occasionally like to broaden the perspective by referencing the context. As discussed previously, it might be a point about contemporary attitudes, or the fact that kings were seen as God's representative on earth, or the fact that Shakespeare makes significant changes to Holinshed's original text. However, these points need to be integrated within your arguments. Note that the question asks you to explore Lady Macbeth's attitude towards Macbeth in the extract and elsewhere in the play. I would suggest spending around 50 to 60% of your response writing about the extract and the rest on the play as a whole. Remember, stronger candidates will know the play as a whole intimately and will have memorized sufficient quotations to be able to bring these in seamlessly within an examination response. In other words, stronger candidates will feel confident with this elsewhere in the play requirements. So, grab your pen. It's time to write your response. The extract will appear in 5 seconds' time. Press pause. Here's my grade 9 response. In this extract, Lady Macbeth both desperately tries to explain away Macbeth's strange behaviour to their guests and berate him in the hope that he starts to behave normally again. She is unsuccessful with both her objectives. To some extent, Lady Macbeth feels that her husband has become unhinged and that the best way to return him to a composed exterior is by challenging his masculinity, a tactic used to great success in Act 1, Scene 7. Following her desperate speech to their guests, in which she implausibly suggests that Macbeth has had regular fits since his youth, she asks him nakedly, "Are you a man?" This rhetorical question implicitly suggests that Macbeth is behaving in a weak, feeble way. Lady Macbeth hopes that her goading will restore her husband to more stereotypically masculine behaviour, such as courage, stoicism, and emotional restraint. However, It doesn't work. And so a few lines later, Lady Macbeth uses the same tactic to try again. She suggests that his passionate outbursts and abrupt twitches would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire, authorised by her grandad. These lines effectively treble the quantity of taunting from the original rhetorical question. Not only is he behaving like a character in a woman's story, but this story has been approved by another, older woman, and it takes place within the domestic sphere of a fireplace, traditionally associated with women. Lady Macbeth's attitudes towards Macbeth is clearly that he needs to be abused and hectored in order to snap him out of his mawkish delusions. This extract also indicates that Lady Macbeth feels that her husband overthinks and has an unhelpfully overactive imagination. Referring to his statement that there is something in the room which might appall the devil, she counters with, "This is the air-drawn dagger which you said led you to Duncan." This line gives an insight into the intimacy between the pair. Macbeth has clearly confided in his wife offstage about what he visualised or imagined in Act 2, Scene 1. However, Lady Macbeth's use of the hyphenated adjective air-drawn pours scorn onto the idea that somehow the dagger and whatever Macbeth thinks he may be seeing in this scene could be substantial or important. It is typically children who draw, whilst drawing a shape in the air is even more babyish. The implication is that she feels her husband is beset by childish, unmanly fancies and hallucinations which need to be brushed off as absurd. Indeed, up until this point in the play, Lady Macbeth has consistently viewed her husband as a man not without ambition, but someone who needs her guidance and direction. The key difference between earlier scenes and this extract is that previously she was successful in her desire to control and lead. For instance, in Act 1, Scene 7, she suggests that her husband may struggle to follow through his initial ambitious plans and desires. Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? The language is blunt and taunting, whilst both the positioning of hope as subject, rather than Macbeth himself, and the suggestion that it may have been drunk rather than vigorously in control is aimed to emasculate. In terms of the question, the fact that Lady Macbeth uses such tactics shows that she feels her husband is susceptible to challenges, not just about his masculinity, but also about his ability to be a consistent, strong decision maker. She feels that, given an appropriately manipulative, emotionally blackmailing barrage from his beloved wife, her husband will cave in. Earlier in Act 1, Scene 5, Lady Macbeth suggests that she feels her husband may be too kind-hearted to act in his own self-interest, something the audience may find surprising, given earlier bloody descriptions of him unseeming MacDonald from the knave to the chaps. In a revealing soliloquy, and well before Macbeth expresses doubts about the enterprise in Act 1, Scene 7, she worries that his nature may be too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. The language is striking. Rather than the adjective kind, we have the phrase too full of the milk of human kindness, which conjures up images of breastfeeding and nurturing. Breastfeeding is a gloriously human act which brings mother and child together within a precious, intimate union. Someone who is metaphorically filled with such milk implicitly knows the value of such a non-violent union, and will be unlikely to want to veer to the other extreme of violent, non-provoked murder. Yet Lady Macbeth does not suggest that her husband is a peace-loving saint. She argues that he would willingly become king, even though technically he is not entitled to do so, yet would wrongly win, provided that he can be a passive agent in the process, would not play false. Across the play as a whole, Lady Macbeth's attitude towards her husband is that he is someone ambitious who needs to be manipulated and propelled forward so that they achieve their joint goals. She feels that he is weak, with an unhelpfully overactive imagination. The irony is, of course, that she is the one who eventually succumbs to madness, leaving her husband alive and raging. How does this response achieve full marks? Well, it starts with a succinct, short introduction, which makes it abundantly clear that I have an understanding of the extract and the question. Within the first main paragraph, notice how specific my point is about Lady Macbeth's attitude towards her husband. I not only suggest that she is worried about his mental state, but also that she needs to address this by challenging his masculinity. Phrases like "to some extent" can be useful when writing more nuanced, sophisticated responses. Do we know for sure that Lady Macbeth feels her husband is unhinged in this scene? Or may she have an inkling of what her husband may be going through mentally, but may she feel that putting on a public display of unity and sanity is more important than anything else? By saying "to some extent," I'm keeping the door open to more complex, interesting interpretations. In terms of the mark scheme, this opening sentence demonstrates a critical, exploratory, conceptualized response to task and whole text. Whilst a bracketed reference to an earlier scene once again implies to the examiner that I really do know the text as a whole well. As the paragraph goes on, note the detail I go into when exploring a quotation. I evaluate the scale of her taunting and explain in detail how the language shows Lady Macbeth attempting to shame her husband into appearing sane. Within this section of my essay, note how I really delve deeply into what Lady Macbeth may be suggesting by her use of the phrase "milk of human kindness." In my interpretation, and it is not the only one, I suggest that this may refer to breast milk and the act of breastfeeding. Someone who is metaphorically linked to such an intimate natural act may not be able to push themselves to the other extremes of violent, non-provoked murder, particularly of God's representative on earth. Make sure quotations are not unnecessarily long. Trim and cut so that you only have the exact bit you need. Make sure you use subject terminology accurately, as I do here with the phrase hyphenated adjective. Now for my to-the-point concluding tips. Firstly, remember that you need to write not just about the extract, but the play as a whole. So you need to have memorized quotations from the entire play. Language analysis is crucial for this question. Go into as much specific detail as you can. Be precise with your subject terminology. Make sure that your writing is lively and interesting for the examiner to read. Macbeth is a wonderful play. Make sure that a genuine interest in the extract and play shines through. Ensure that you focus on the question throughout. Don't get sidetracked. Return to the question towards the end of each main paragraph and develop your initial points. Weave in the occasional reference to the context, ensuring that you do not oversimplify. In terms of context, why not watch this video? Explore Shakespeare's adaptation of Hollington's Chronicles of Scotland in Macbeth. It's actually very interesting.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare GCSE AQA guide to writing that grade 9 essay on Macbeth. Many thanks for watching.